The dress was stunning, the color of midnight sky with silver beading that caught the light like stars. I had saved for months, working extra shifts at the café downtown, counting every dollar until I finally had enough. 3 hours before prom, I stood in front of my mirror, heart full of dreams for the night ahead. I didn't know that downstairs, my mother was tearing those dreams apart thread by thread. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. I was 17, a senior at Westlake High, and this was supposed to be my moment. After years of living under my mother's impossible standards, of never being quite good enough, of always falling short, prom night was going to be different. I had picked the dress without her input, styled my hair the way I wanted, even bought makeup she would have called too mature. For once, I was going to feel beautiful on my own terms. The house was quiet that afternoon. Dad was at the Coast Guard headquarters, finishing paperwork before taking the weekend off for my big night. Mom had been unusually silent all day, moving through the house like a ghost, barely looking at me when I mentioned I was going to start getting ready. I should have seen the warning signs. My best friend Olivia texted me a selfie in her emerald green dress, captioned, "T-3 hours until the best night of our lives." I smiled, replying with a row of heart emojis before heading to the shower. The warm water washed over me as I hummed to myself, imagining walking into the hotel ballroom, imagining the look on Ethan's face when he saw me in that dress. I wrapped myself in a towel, hair dripping down my back, and padded to my bedroom. The dress hung on my closet door, protected by a clear garment bag. I reached for it, fingers trembling slightly with excitement. That's when I heard the front door slam. The sound carried up the stairs, followed by my father's voice calling my name. "Emma, you upstairs, sweetheart?" "Yeah, Dad. Just getting ready," I called back, unzipping the garment bag. His footsteps were heavy on the stairs. Too heavy, too quick. Something was wrong. I could feel it in the sudden tension in the air, in the way he knocked once, sharply on my door. "Dad?" I opened the door a crack, clutching my towel. His face was grim, jaw tight in the way it only got when he was containing something powerful. "Your mother came by my office about 20 minutes ago," he said, voice controlled. "She was upset." My stomach dropped. "About what?" He didn't answer, just held out his phone. A video played on the screen. Our kitchen. My mother standing over the island counter, scissors in hand. And there, spread out beneath her hands, was my dress. My beautiful dress. She cut methodically, deliberately, severing beadwork, slicing through seams, cutting the bodice into jagged pieces. "This is for her own good," her voice came through the speaker, cold and precise. "She needs to understand that actions have consequences." That dress was completely inappropriate. I won't have my daughter looking like that in public. The phone shook slightly as my father's voice responded from behind the camera. "What have you done, Catherine?" She looked up then, eyes wide with surprise at being caught, but not remorse. Never remorse. "I'm teaching her a lesson." She deliberately went against my wishes. She knew I wanted her to wear the pink dress I picked out. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. The walls of my bedroom seemed to close in around me as I watched my mother destroy months of saving, hours of searching, all my dreams for one perfect night where I could just be myself. I reached for the doorframe to steady myself. "Where is she now?" I whispered. My father's eyes, sea gray like mine, were steely. "She left. Said she was going to her sister's for the weekend. That you'd come to your senses by the time she got back." I pushed past him, still in my towel, hair dripping down my back, and ran downstairs to the kitchen. The evidence was still there, silver beads scattered across the tile floor like teardrops. Scraps of midnight blue fabric piled in the trash can. A single sleeve draped over the back of a chair, the only piece still somewhat intact. "No, no, no," I sank to my knees, picking up beads with trembling fingers. "She can't have." She wouldn't. But she had. My mother, who should have been helping me zip up my dress, who should have been taking photos to commemorate the milestone, had instead chosen to destroy the one thing I had dared to choose for myself. I felt sick, hollow, like someone had scooped out everything inside me and left just a shell. My father knelt beside me, his uniform still crisp, despite the turmoil. Admiral James Harrison, respected leader of men, commander of ships, now gathering tiny beads from his kitchen floor, while his daughter fell apart. "Emma," he said gently, "look at me." I couldn't. I kept picking up beads, as if somehow I could put them back, fix the dress, fix this night, fix everything broken in our family. "Emma." His voice was firmer now, the voice that commanded respect across Coast Guard stations nationwide. "This is not okay. What she did is not okay." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Something in his tone made me look up. His eyes were fierce, determined in a way I'd never seen directed at my mother before. Usually he stayed out of our conflicts, claiming neutrality, or saying it was women's business that he didn't understand. But now, he was fully present, fully engaged. "We have 3 hours," he said, checking his watch with military precision. "That's a mission timeline I can work with." "Mission?" I echoed, confused. He stood, offering me his hand. "Get dressed. Something comfortable. We're going to fix this." I took his hand, letting him pull me to my feet. "Dad, prom starts at 7. Even if we drive to the city right now, there's no way we can find another dress in time. Nothing will be open late enough for alterations." He smiled then, a small, determined smile I recognized from photos taken on Coast Guard cutters in rough seas. "Trust me. I've navigated through hurricanes. This is just a storm we need to weather together." 20 minutes later, we were in his SUV, driving toward downtown. I sat in the passenger seat, hair hastily dried and pulled back, wearing jeans and a sweatshirt, feeling numb. My phone buzzed repeatedly with texts from Olivia, from Ethan, asking about meeting times, about corsages, about all the small details that had seemed so important just an hour ago. "Where are we going?" I asked as he took the expressway exit that led to the upscale shopping district. "Calling in reinforcements," he replied, tapping the hands-free button on his steering wheel. "Lieutenant Commander Marshall, Harrison here. Initiating Operation Cinderella. Need all hands on deck." I stared at him. "Operation Cinderella?" But before I could ask, a crisp female voice responded through the speakers. "Copy that, Admiral. Assets are being mobilized. Rendezvous at Milestone Boutique in 20 minutes. My father caught my bewildered expression and actually winked at me. "Your godmother Diane is Lieutenant Commander Marshall. She's also friends with the owner of the best formal wear shop in the city." "But they'll be closing," I protested weakly. "Not for us," he said with quiet confidence. "Not today." As we pulled into the parking lot of an elegant storefront with Milestone written in gold script on the window, I saw 3 other cars already there. Women in civilian clothes, but with the unmistakable posture of military personnel, stood waiting. I recognized Diane, who had been at every birthday since I could remember, though I'd never known her rank until today. My father parked and turned to me. "Your mother made a unilateral decision today. She declared war on your happiness. That was her mistake." His voice was calm but resolute. "Because she forgot one important thing." "What's that?" I asked, my voice small. "No one attacks my daughter. No one." He squeezed my hand once, then got out of the car. The next 2 hours were a blur. Diane embraced me tightly before introducing me to the boutique owner, an elegant woman named Meredith, who looked at me with kind eyes and said simply, "Let's find you something magnificent." While I was whisked into a dressing room, I could hear my father on the phone, his voice authoritative as he issued what sounded like orders. "I need the full documentation. Yes, photos of everything. Credit card statements, receipts for the original dress. We're establishing a pattern of behavior." Dresses appeared as if by magic. Midnight blue ones, because Diane remembered my preference. styles similar to what I had chosen myself. The women, all Coast Guard officers I learned later, moved with tactical precision. One arranged for rush alterations with a tailor who apparently owed Diane a favor. Another was on the phone with a local jeweler about accessories. "Try this one," Meredith said, holding up a gown that took my breath away. Deep blue with a subtle shimmer, not beaded like my original dress but with delicate silver embroidery across the bodice. It was different, but somehow even more perfect. As I stepped out of the dressing room in that dress, the activity in the boutique stopped. My father looked up from his phone and I saw something I'd never seen before, tears in his eyes. "Emma," he said, voice rough with emotion, "you look beautiful." For the first time since seeing the destroyed dress, I felt something other than devastation. A small spark of hope, of defiance. My mother had tried to ruin this night, but she hadn't succeeded. Not completely. Meredith made quick chalk marks where minor alterations were needed. "We can have this ready in 45 minutes, she said. "Just enough time." While the tailor worked, Diane sat beside me. "Your father has been planning to talk to you about your mother for some time," she said quietly. "About her behavior, about how it's affecting you." I looked at her in surprise. "He has?" She nodded. "He's been documenting incidents. Building a case, you might say. Today just accelerated his timeline." Across the room, my father was still on the phone, voice low and intense. "No, counselor. I'm not overreacting. I have documented evidence of escalating emotional abuse. Yes, I have photos. Yes, there are witnesses." "Is he talking to a lawyer?" I asked, stunned. Diane squeezed my hand. "He's talking to several people. Your father may seem easygoing at home, but he doesn't approach any mission without a strategic plan." By the time the dress was altered, my hair had been styled by another reinforcement who arrived with a professional kit. Subtle makeup was applied, jewelry was loaned, shoes were found, every detail attended to, with military efficiency and surprising tenderness. At 6:45 p.m., I stood in front of a full-length mirror, transformed. The girl who had collapsed in tears on the kitchen floor just hours ago was gone. In her place stood someone stronger, someone who had been knocked down but got back up again. My father appeared behind me in the mirror's reflection, still in his uniform, the gold insignia on his shoulders catching the light. "Ready for inspection, cadet?" he asked with a small smile. I turned and impulsively hugged him, breathing in the familiar scent of his aftershave. "Thank you, Dad." He held me carefully, mindful of the dress. "This is just the beginning," he said softly. "What your mother did today crossed a line. One I should have drawn years ago." Before I could ask what he meant, there was a honk outside. My date, Ethan, right on time, completely unaware of the drama that had unfolded. My father handed me a small velvet box. "Your grandmother's earrings. She was a strong woman, too." Inside were delicate silver stars, perfect with the dress. As I put them on, he added, "I've arranged for a car to bring you home later. Enjoy your night, be a teenager, dance. Have fun." He paused, then added with unusual fierceness, "This is your night. You've earned it." I walked out of the boutique to where Ethan waited, his eyes widening appreciatively when he saw me. My father followed, introducing himself with a firm handshake that made Ethan stand straighter. "Sir, I'll have her home by midnight," Ethan promised. My father smiled. "Actually, the curfew is extended to 1 a.m. tonight. Special circumstances." He looked at me. "Your mother will not be home when you return. She's staying with your aunt longer than planned." The way he said it made me realize this wasn't a coincidence. He had arranged this too. Created space for me to enjoy the aftermath of my prom, without fear or tension. As Ethan and I drove away, I looked back to see my father standing with Diane and the others, a protective formation, watching until we turned the corner. For the first time in years, I felt truly safe, truly protected. What I didn't know then was that while I danced under spinning lights in a hotel ballroom, my father was executing a different kind of maneuver, one that would change our family forever. Operation Cinderella was just phase one of a much larger campaign, and Admiral Harrison never went into battle unprepared. The prom was everything I had dreamed it would be. Ethan couldn't stop complimenting my dress, completely unaware of the day's drama. Olivia squealed when she saw me, twirling me around on the dance floor. "You look absolutely stunning," she gushed. "That dress is even better than the one you showed me before." I hesitated, unsure how much to share. "There was a last-minute change of plans," I said finally. She raised an eyebrow but didn't push. That was Olivia, intuitive enough to sense when not to pry. Instead, she grabbed my hand. "Come on, they're playing our song." For hours, I let myself forget. Forget the snip of scissors through fabric. Forget my mother's cold voice saying it was for my own good. Forget the scattered beads on our kitchen floor. I danced until my feet hurt, laughed until my sides ached, took silly photos in the prom booth with Ethan and our friends. But as midnight approached, reality began to creep back in. What would happen tomorrow? What would happen when my mother returned home? The familiar anxiety tightened my chest, a feeling I'd lived with for so long I barely recognized it as abnormal anymore. Ethan noticed my mood shift as we slow danced to a ballad. "Everything okay?" he asked, concern in his eyes. I forced a smile. "Just tired." It's been a long day. At 12:30 a.m., right on schedule, a sleek black car pulled up outside the hotel. The driver, a young woman who introduced herself as Petty Officer Ramirez, opened the door for us with military courtesy. "Admiral's orders," she explained with a small smile. "Door-to-door service." After dropping Ethan at his house with a kiss goodnight that made my worries momentarily fade, Petty Officer Ramirez drove me home. As we approached our house, I was surprised to see lights still on downstairs. "Your father asked me to make sure you got inside safely," she said, as she walked me to the door. I thanked her, then hesitated. "Have you worked with my dad long?" She stood a little straighter. 3 years, ma'am. He's the finest officer I've ever served under. The whole station would follow him anywhere." With that, she actually saluted, and returned to the car. Inside, I found my father at the dining room table, still in uniform despite the late hour. Papers were spread out before him, his reading glasses perched on his nose, a cup of coffee at his elbow. He looked up when I entered, his face softening. "How was it?" he asked. "Perfect," I said, and meant it. "Thank you for everything." He gestured to the chair across from him. "Sit down for a minute, Emma. There's something we need to discuss." My stomach tightened as I carefully sat, mindful of my dress. This was it, the moment when everything went back to normal. When he told me we'd have to smooth things over with Mom, that we'd all pretend today never happened. Instead, he slid a folder across the table to me. "I want you to look at these. You're old enough to understand what's been happening in this house." Inside were printed emails, text messages, photos, documentation of my mother's behavior over years, cruel comments disguised as concern, helpful criticisms that left invisible bruises, impulsive punishments for imagined infractions. Page after page of evidence, meticulously collected and annotated. "Dad," I whispered, shocked. "You've been keeping track of all this?" He nodded grimly. "For the past 2 years. At first, I thought I was overreacting, that all marriages had rough patches, that she was just strict with you because she wanted the best for you." He removed his glasses, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "But a good officer learns to recognize patterns. And the pattern here became clear." "What pattern?" I asked, though part of me already knew. "Emotional abuse," he said simply. "Of both of us, but especially you. What happened today with your dress?" That was just the most visible example of something that's been happening for years. The words hit me like physical blows. Abuse. It was such a stark term for something I'd normalized. Something I'd learned to navigate like treacherous waters. Something I'd convinced myself was just my mother's way of showing she cared. I've consulted with a family therapist, he continued, and with a lawyer. I wanted to wait until you were heading to college before making any major changes, but after today. His jaw tightened. I can't stand by anymore. What are you saying? My voice sounded distant to my own ears. I'm saying your mother needs help that I can't provide, and you need protection that I haven't been giving you. He reached across the table, taking my hand. I'm saying that tomorrow, when she comes home, things are going to be different. I've already moved her things to the guest room. And on Monday, I'm filing for legal separation. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. My father, who had always been the calm one, the peacemaker, the one who said let's not rock the boat, was taking decisive action. For me. Because of a prom dress. This isn't just about the dress, he said, as if reading my thoughts. The dress was just the final straw. This is about creating a safe environment for you during your last months at home before college, and about me finally facing the truth about our marriage. I stared at the folder, at the evidence of years of small cruelties. She'll be furious, I whispered. Probably, he agreed. But for once, her fury will be directed at me, not you. And unlike you, I have the rank and resources to weather that storm. There was no fear in his voice, only resolve. What happens now? I asked. Now, he said, standing up and offering me his hand. You go get some sleep. You've had a long day, and you looked beautiful at your prom. Tomorrow will take care of itself. As I climbed the stairs to my bedroom, still in my midnight blue dress, I felt strangely weightless, like something heavy I'd been carrying for years had been lifted from my shoulders. Not completely gone, but lighter. I didn't know then that this night marked not just the end of my high school experience, but the beginning of a new chapter for our family. One where truth was spoken aloud, where destruction wasn't confused with love, where an Admiral father would stand between his daughter and harm, even when that harm came from within their own home. I woke to the sound of car doors closing. Soft morning light filtered through my curtains as I blinked awake, still wearing my pajamas but wrapped in the memories of last night's prom. For a moment I lay still, savoring the lingering happiness before reality crashed back. My dress. My mother. The confrontation that was surely coming. Downstairs, voices rose and fell. My father's, steady and measured. Then my mother's, sharp with indignation. I slipped out of bed and crept to my door, pressing my ear against it. This is absolutely ridiculous, James. You're overreacting. It was just a dress. No, Catherine. It wasn't just a dress. It was a deliberate act of cruelty toward our daughter, and it's the last in a long series of such acts. I heard something slam, a purse on the counter, perhaps, or my mother's hand on a table. So you've been keeping score? Building a case against me like I'm one of your subordinates? I've been paying attention, my father replied, his voice still calm but with an edge I rarely heard. Something I should have done years ago. Their voices dropped then, becoming murmurs I couldn't distinguish. I sat on the edge of my bed, heart pounding. This was different. Usually, when my mother was upset, my father retreated, making peace at any cost. But now he was standing firm, and I wasn't sure whether to feel hopeful or terrified. My phone buzzed with a text from Olivia. Details! How was last night with Ethan? Did he kiss you at midnight like he planned? I smiled despite everything. Some parts of life were still normal. I typed back a brief reply, promising full details later, just as a knock came at my door. Emma, you awake? My father's voice. I opened the door to find him looking tired but resolved. Your mother and I need to speak with you downstairs. I nodded, pulling on a cardigan over my pajamas and following him down to the living room. My mother sat on the edge of the sofa, back straight, hands folded in her lap. The perfect posture she'd always insisted on, that she'd made me practice by balancing books on my head when I was younger. Good morning, Emma, she said, her voice carefully controlled. Your father seems to think we need to have a family discussion. I sat in the armchair across from her, pulling my knees up to my chest, making myself small out of habit. My father remained standing, positioned slightly between us like a buffer. First, he said, I want to be clear about what happened yesterday. Catherine, Would you like to explain to Emma why you destroyed her prom dress? My mother's nostrils flared slightly, the only visible sign of her anger. I've already told you, James. The dress was inappropriate. Too revealing. Too mature. I was protecting her. By destroying something she saved her own money for? He challenged. By waiting until hours before her prom to leave her with nothing to wear? She turned to me, her voice softening into the reasonable tone she used when explaining why her actions were ultimately for my benefit. Emma, sweetheart, I know you were excited about that dress. But trust me, you would have regretted wearing it. People would have talked. You wouldn't have been taken seriously. Before I could respond, my father interjected. That wasn't your decision to make, Catherine. Emma is 17, not 7. She's capable of choosing her own clothing. Well, clearly she isn't if that's what she chose. My mother snapped, her careful composure slipping. I flinched, the familiar feeling of inadequacy washing over me. Never quite right, never quite good enough. My father noticed my reaction, his jaw tightening. This stops now, he said quietly. The criticism, the control, the arbitrary rules that change whenever it suits you, it stops today. My mother laughed, a brittle sound. And who decided that? You? The man who's barely been present in her upbringing? Who's been sailing around the world while I'm here doing the actual parenting? That's not fair, I said suddenly, surprising myself. Both of them turned to look at me. Dad might have been deployed sometimes, but he calls. He listens. He actually asks about my day and cares about the answer. My mother's eyes narrowed. I see. So you two have formed quite the alliance behind my back. This isn't about taking sides, my father said firmly. This is about creating a healthier environment for our family, which is why I've made some decisions. He outlined his plan then, his voice steady as if delivering a briefing to his officers. Legal separation. Family therapy, separately and together. New household rules that would be clear and consistent. And most shockingly, he would be taking a temporary shore assignment to be home more regularly during this transition. You can't be serious, my mother said when he finished. You're throwing away 20 years of marriage over a teenage tantrum about a dress? No, he replied. I'm addressing 20 years of controlling behavior that's hurt our daughter. The dress was just the final evidence I needed that things won't change on their own. My mother turned to me, her expression shifting to wounded disappointment. An expression I knew well, one that usually made me scramble to make things right, to soothe her feelings at the expense of my own. Emma, she said softly, do you really see me as this monster your father is describing? After everything I've sacrificed for you? Everything I've done to make sure you have the best opportunities? I looked down at my hands, at the silver nail polish Olivia had applied before prom. Another small rebellion my mother hadn't yet noticed. I just want to be allowed to make my own choices sometimes, I said finally, and not be punished when they're different from what you would choose. She stood abruptly. I need some air. Clearly the two of you have already decided I'm the villain in this family. She grabbed her purse and car keys. I'm going to my sister's. Call me when you're both ready to be reasonable. The front door closed behind her with a decisive click. Not quite a slam, but close. My father sighed, sitting down on the sofa where she had been. Are you okay? He asked. I nodded, though I wasn't sure if it was true. What happens now? Now, he said, we start rebuilding. Not just the fallout from yesterday, but all the small damages that have accumulated over years. He outlined a plan that was methodical, structured, and thorough, exactly what I would expect from an admiral. First, he'd already consulted with a lawyer, who would be filing paperwork on Monday. Second, he'd arranged for me to speak with a therapist, someone who specialized in family dynamics and emotional recovery. Third, he'd scheduled a meeting with my academic counselor to discuss college applications and ensure my mother's absence wouldn't impact any recommendation letters or paperwork. You've thought of everything, I said, a little awed. He smiled slightly. In the Coast Guard, we have a saying, proper preparation prevents poor performance. The 5 Ps. He reached out, covering my hand with his. I should have prepared better for this storm, Emma. I saw the warning signs but convinced myself it wasn't as serious as it seemed. For the rest of the weekend, the house felt oddly peaceful. My mother remained at my aunt's, sending occasional text messages that alternated between righteous anger and wounded victimhood. I responded minimally, following my father's advice to acknowledge but not engage. On Sunday evening, as we prepared dinner together, a simple pasta dish he'd learned to make during a deployment in Italy, he asked me a question that caught me off guard. "When did you first notice your mother's behavior wasn't normal?" I paused, knife hovering over a tomato I was slicing. I think I always knew something was off, but I didn't have anything to compare it to. It was just how things were. He nodded, stirring the sauce with focused attention. "I've been doing a lot of reading this weekend. About emotional abuse, about controlling parents, about the damage that can do to a child's sense of self." "I'm not damaged," I protested automatically. His eyes met mine, sad but determined. "Not irreparably, no. But I've watched you shrink yourself, doubt yourself, apologize for things that aren't your fault. That's not who you should have to be." That night, I lay awake thinking about his words. Was that true? Had I been shaped by my mother's expectations, her criticisms, her conditional approval? I thought about how I'd felt in that new prom dress, standing taller, smiling more freely, feeling beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with meeting someone else's standards. Monday morning brought rain, soft and steady against my window. I got ready for school with an unusual sense of calm, choosing an outfit my mother would have deemed too casual, without the familiar twinge of defiance and fear. My father sat at the kitchen table, already in uniform, making calls that he paused when I entered. "Ready for school?" he asked. I nodded, pouring myself coffee. Another small freedom recently granted. "What are you doing today?" "Meeting with the lawyer at 9. Then heading to the station for a briefing with my team." He hesitated. "Your mother called this morning. She wants to come by the house to collect some things. I told her to come while you're at school, so you don't have to deal with that today." I felt a rush of gratitude for his thoughtfulness. "Thanks, Dad." He drove me to school, an unusual luxury since he was typically gone before I woke up. As we pulled up to the main entrance, he said, "I'll pick you up after final bell. We have that appointment with Dr. Brennan at 4. Dr. Brennan, the therapist he'd arranged for me to see. Part of me was nervous, unsure what I would say or how to explain a lifetime of walking on eggshells. But another part felt a strange relief at the thought of speaking to someone who might understand. "Okay," I agreed. "See you then." School passed in a blur of congratulations about prom, questions about summer plans, teachers stressing about final exams. Olivia caught me between classes, linking her arm through mine. "Spill," she demanded. "What's going on? You've been super vague about prom, and your mom didn't even post any of those embarrassing pre-dance photos she always threatens to take." I hesitated, unsure how much to share. Olivia knew my mother could be strict, but I'd never fully explained the extent of her control, her criticism, her punishments disguised as protection. "It's complicated," I began. "My parents are going through some stuff right now." Her eyes widened. "Are they getting divorced? Oh my God, Em, why didn't you say something?" "Not divorced, separated, I think. It's all happening really fast." I took a deep breath. "My mom destroyed my prom dress, the one I showed you before. Cut it to pieces hours before Ethan was supposed to pick me up." Olivia's mouth fell open. "What? Why would she do that?" She said it was inappropriate, too revealing. But, really, it was because I chose it myself instead of wearing the one she picked out. Understanding dawned in Olivia's eyes. "That's why you had a different dress. I thought you just changed your mind." She squeezed my arm. "Wait, how did you get a new dress so last minute?" I smiled, remembering. "My dad." He called in reinforcements. His Coast Guard colleagues. They basically staged a rescue mission for my prom night. By the time I finished explaining Operation Cinderella, Olivia was shaking her head in amazement. "Your dad is a total badass. I had no idea." "Neither did I admitted. He's always been, I don't know, in the background, letting my mom take the lead on parenting stuff. But now he's different. More involved. More protective. Good, Olivia said firmly. You deserve that, Em. You always have. The rest of the school day passed quickly. True to his word, my father was waiting in the parking lot when the final bell rang, his Coast Guard SUV standing out among the teachers' cars and students' hand-me-downs. "How was school?" he asked as I slid into the passenger seat. "Fine. Normal." I buckled my seatbelt. "Did Mom come by the house?" He nodded, pulling into traffic. She did. Took some clothes, her laptop, some personal items. Left a note for you on your desk. My stomach tightened. What did it say? I didn't read it, he said simply. It's your correspondence. That small respect for my privacy, so different from my mother, who routinely went through my drawers, my backpack, my phone when she could get access, made my throat tighten with emotion. Dr. Brennan's office was in a converted Victorian house downtown, with a brass plaque beside the door reading, Family Counseling Associates. Inside, the waiting room was painted a soft blue, with comfortable chairs and framed nature photography on the walls. No clinical white, no sterile smell. It felt safe. My father checked us in with the receptionist, then sat beside me, his uniform hat in his lap. I noticed he was tapping his fingers against his knee, a rare sign of nervousness from a man who remained calm during hurricane rescues. "You okay, Dad?" I asked quietly. He smiled, a bit ruefully. "I'm fine. This is new territory for me. Command decisions, emergency protocols. Those I understand. Family therapy is outside my usual jurisdiction." Before I could respond, a door opened and a woman with silver-streaked dark hair appeared. "Emma and James Harrison? I'm Dr. Brennan. Please come in." The therapy session wasn't what I expected. There were no probing questions about my childhood, no immediate demands to talk about my feelings. Instead, Dr. Brennan first explained how these sessions would work, that this was a safe space, that nothing I said would be shared with my mother without my permission, that healing was a process, not an event. "Admiral Harrison has given me some background," she said, "but I'd like to hear from you, Emma. In your own words, how would you describe what happened this weekend?" I started hesitantly, explaining about the dress, about my mother's reaction, about my father's intervention. As I spoke, the story expanded to include other incidents, awards ceremonies my mother had criticized my appearance for, friendship choices she'd undermined, hobbies she'd discouraged for being impractical or unladylike. Dr. Brennan listened attentively, occasionally making notes but mostly just letting me talk. My father sat quietly, his expression shifting between sadness and resolve as he heard some details for the first time. "What you're describing," Dr. Brennan said when I finally fell silent, "is a pattern of controlling behavior that's affected how you see yourself and your place in the world. It's important to recognize that this isn't normal or healthy parenting, even when it's done with good intentions." She turned to my father. "And you, Admiral? When did you recognize this pattern?" He straightened slightly, as if delivering a report. "I've had concerns for years, but I rationalized them. Catherine comes from a very strict background herself. I thought she was just reproducing what she knew." He paused. "And I was gone so often on deployments. It seemed presumptuous to question her parenting when I wasn't there for the day-to-day." Dr. Brennan nodded. "That's a common dynamic in military families. One parent becomes the primary disciplinarian, while the other tries to make up for absences by being more permissive. It can create a good cop/bad cop situation that's confusing for children." "But this went beyond discipline," my father said quietly. "This was destruction. Deliberate harm." "Yes," Dr. Brennan agreed. "The incident with the dress represents an escalation, a boundary crossed that made the pattern impossible to ignore any longer." By the end of the session, we had a plan. I would continue seeing Dr. Brennan weekly. My father would attend separate sessions with another therapist in the practice. Eventually, if my mother was willing, we would try family sessions together. In the meantime, Dr. Brennan gave me some reading material about recognizing emotional manipulation and setting healthy boundaries. As we drove home, rain still falling gently on the windshield, my father asked, What did you think? Of Dr. Brennan? I considered the question. I like her. She didn't make me feel broken. He nodded, keeping his eyes on the road. That's because you're not broken, Emma. Bruised, maybe, but not broken. At home, I went straight to my room, curious about the note my mother had left. It sat on my desk, a pale blue envelope with my name written in her perfect handwriting. Inside was a card, the front featuring a watercolor of a mother and daughter walking on a beach. The message inside was brief. Emma, I hope you'll understand someday that everything I've done has been out of love for you. Your father is overreacting to a momentary lapse in judgment on my part. When you're ready to talk, really talk, not just listen to his version of events, I'll be at Aunt Susan's. Love, Mom. No apology, no acknowledgement of the harm done. Just the same narrative I'd heard all my life, that her actions, however painful, were justified by her intentions. I placed the card back in its envelope and tucked it into my desk drawer. Then I sat at my window, watching the rain make patterns on the glass, thinking about patterns and broken things, and the possibility of rebuilding. My phone buzzed with a text from Ethan. Thinking about you. Prom was amazing. Want to grab coffee tomorrow after school? I smiled, typing back a simple, yes. Another small choice, another step forward. Outside, the rain began to ease, patches of blue appearing between the clouds. Not clear skies yet, but a promise of them to come. Downstairs, I could hear my father in the kitchen, the familiar sounds of dinner preparation. Not a return to normal, because normal had never been particularly healthy, but the beginning of something new, something better, something built with intention rather than fear. I didn't know then how difficult the coming weeks would be, how my mother would alternate between tearful pleas for reconciliation and cold fury at what she saw as betrayal, how flying beads and torn fabric would be replaced by harsh words and legal documents, how some family members would take sides, while others would urge us to paper over the cracks for the sake of appearances. But I did know, sitting in my room with rain-washed light spilling across my floor, that something fundamental had shifted. My father had seen the destruction and chosen to rebuild rather than ignore, and in doing so he'd given me permission to do the same. 2 weeks after prom, I sat on the bleachers watching Westlake High's graduation rehearsal. As class vice president, I was helping coordinate the ceremony, while trying not to think about the growing storm in my personal life. My phone buzzed for the 5th time that hour, another text from my mother. I ignored it, just as I'd ignored the previous 4. Everything okay? Ms. Winters, our student activities coordinator, asked as she passed by with a clipboard. I nodded, forcing a smile. Just finalizing the seating arrangements for the band. She patted my shoulder before moving on to wrangle the seniors who were more interested in signing yearbooks than practicing their processional. I returned to my task, grateful for the distraction of color-coded seating charts and minute-by-minute schedules. My phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't my mother but my father. Meeting with the mediator ran long, picking you up at 5:30 instead of 5. Everything okay there? I typed back a quick confirmation, feeling the now familiar rush of gratitude for his consistent communication. No demands, no guilt trips, just information and concern. It shouldn't have felt revolutionary, but it did. The past 2 weeks had been a crash course in what healthy family dynamics could look like. My father had taken a temporary reassignment to local headquarters, allowing him to be home every night. He cooked dinner, asked about my day, helped with college application essays, and never once made me feel like his presence was conditional on my behavior. Meanwhile, my mother's communication alternated between wounded silence and emotional outbursts. She'd moved permanently to Aunt Susan's, taking more of her belongings during a tense afternoon when my father had made sure I was out of the house. The legal separation was proceeding, with both sides retaining lawyers and a mediator attempting to facilitate discussions about finances, living arrangements, and, most contentiously, my custody and care. I was 17, nearly 18, old enough that the courts would consider my preferences, but that didn't stop my mother from fighting for control, insisting that I should live with her, that my father's military career made him an unsuitable primary guardian, that I needed a mother's guidance during these formative years. Earth to Emma! Olivia's voice broke through my thoughts as she plopped down beside me on the bleachers. "I've been waving at you for like 5 minutes." "Sorry," I said, tucking my phone away, "just distracted." She nudged my shoulder with hers. "Graduation committee stuff or mom stuff?" "Both," I admitted. "Plus, college applications, finals next week, and trying to figure out if I'm supposed to invite both my parents to grad night or risk World War III by only inviting my dad." Olivia grimaced sympathetically. "That sucks. What does Dr. Brennan say about it?" I'd been seeing Dr. Brennan twice weekly since that first appointment, working through years of accumulated anxiety and people-pleasing behaviors. Olivia, ever supportive, had taken to asking, quote, "What would Dr. Brennan say?" whenever I found myself slipping into old patterns of self-doubt. "She says I should prioritize what feels safe and healthy for me, not what might make either of them happy," I replied. "Smart lady." Olivia nodded approvingly. "So what feels safe and healthy for Emma Harrison right now?" I considered the question seriously. "Having my dad there. Maybe Diane, his lieutenant commander friend, who helped with the dress rescue. Definitely not a situation where my mom can make a scene or try to guilt-trip me in front of everyone." "Then that's your answer," Olivia said with simple certainty. "Invite your dad and Diane. Your mom can see the Instagram photos like everyone else's relatives who can't make it." The rehearsal ended, students scattering to their cars and waiting parents. I gathered my materials, said goodbye to Olivia, and headed to the front of the school to wait for my father. As I stood in the late afternoon sunshine, I felt a strange mix of exhaustion and hope. The past 2 weeks had been hard, but they had also shown me glimpses of what life could be when I wasn't constantly bracing for criticism or trying to make myself smaller to avoid notice. My father's SUV pulled up precisely at 5:30. I climbed in, tossing my backpack onto the rear seat. "Productive rehearsal?" he asked as he navigated out of the school parking lot. "Mostly. Mr. Peterson still can't pronounce half the graduates' names, but we have a week to fix that." I settled back in my seat. "How was the meeting with the mediator?" He sighed, drumming his fingers on the steering wheel at a red light. "Challenging. Your mother is resistant to several of the proposed arrangements." I could imagine. My mother didn't compromise easily, especially when she felt wronged. "Is she still insisting I should live with her?" "Yes," he confirmed. "Despite the fact that you've made your preference clear, and despite the guardian ad litem's recommendation that your wishes be respected given your age." The guardian ad litem, a court-appointed advocate assigned to represent my best interests during the separation proceedings, had interviewed me twice. A kind but no-nonsense woman named Ms. Rodriguez. She had listened carefully to my explanation of why I preferred to stay with my father, had observed both parents interacting with me separately, and had ultimately supported my choice in her report. "So what happens now?" I asked. "Now we wait for the judge to make a temporary ruling on custody and support. That should happen next week." He glanced at me. "In the meantime, your mother has requested a dinner with you. Just the two of you. She says it's been too long since you've talked properly." My stomach twisted. I hadn't seen my mother in person since the morning after prom, when she'd stormed out of our family meeting. Our communication had been limited to terse text messages and one uncomfortable phone call that had ended with her in tears, and me feeling simultaneously guilty and angry. "Do I have to go?" I asked, hating how young and uncertain my voice sounded. My father shook his head immediately. "No. Absolutely not. If you're not comfortable with a one-on-one dinner, we can suggest alternatives. A meeting with Dr. Brennan present, perhaps. Or a shorter interaction in a public place." His immediate reassurance, so different from my mother's insistence that family obligations trumped personal comfort, made my shoulders relax. "I'll think about it," I promised. "Maybe lunch instead of dinner? Somewhere with a time limit, like that café near the harbor that gets busy after an hour." He nodded approvingly. "Good strategic thinking. Let me know what you decide, and I'll communicate it to her lawyer." That evening, as I studied for finals at the kitchen table, my father working quietly on his laptop across from me, I found myself thinking about how much had changed in just 2 weeks. The house felt different, calmer, lighter somehow. He'd rearranged some furniture, added plants, replaced some of my mother's more formal decorative choices with simpler, more comfortable alternatives. Small changes that somehow made the space feel more like a home and less like a showpiece. "Dad?" I said, looking up from my textbook. "Hmm?" He glanced up from his screen. "Thank you. For everything. For stepping in. For not letting what happened with the dress just disappear like all the other times." His eyes softened. "I should have done it sooner, Emma. Much sooner. I'm sorry it took something so dramatic to wake me up." "Me too," I admitted. "But I'm glad you did wake up." The next morning, I woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of voices downstairs. Curious, I pulled on a robe and went to investigate. In the kitchen, I found my father in conversation with Diane, both of them in uniform. Cups of coffee in hand, a map spread out on the counter between them. "Morning, Emma." Diane greeted me with a warm smile. "Hope we didn't wake you." "You didn't," I assured her, pouring myself coffee from the pot. Since prom night, Diane had become a regular presence in our house, dropping by for dinner, offering advice on college applications based on her own daughter's recent experience, sometimes just sitting on the deck with my father, talking in low voices about things I couldn't hear. "What's with the map?" My father looked up, a spark of excitement in his eyes I hadn't seen in years. "Preliminary planning. The station's been tasked with coordinating a multi-agency rescue exercise next month. Complex scenario, multiple vessels, challenging weather conditions. Your dad's the perfect person to lead it," Diane added. "Best tactician in the region." I watched as he traced a route on the map, explaining wind patterns and current shifts with an enthusiasm that made him seem younger, more energetic. This was the father I remembered from childhood, the one who'd explained navigation to me using cereal bowls as boats in the bathtub, the one who'd taught me to read weather in the clouds before I could read words on a page. Somewhere along the way, that father had faded, becoming a background figure in our house, deferring to my mother in all domestic matters, retreating into work and quiet compliance. Now he was reemerging not just as a parent but as a whole person with passions and expertise in friendships. "Would it be okay if I watched?" I asked impulsively. "The exercise, I mean. If it's not classified or anything." They exchanged surprised glances. "There will be an observation area for personnel family members," Diane said. "It's actually good experience for anyone considering a future in emergency management or maritime operations." "Which reminds me," my father added, "that college fair at the convention center is this Saturday. The Coast Guard Academy will have representatives there, along with all the schools on your list. Wanna go?" The casual way he supported my interests, neither pushing nor dismissing, was still new enough to feel remarkable. "Definitely," I agreed, "but I'm still not sure about the academy. I might want something different, less structured." He nodded, no disappointment visible in his expression. "That's what college fairs are for, exploring options." He checked his watch. "We should head out, Diane. Emma, there's breakfast in the warming drawer. I'll be home by 6. After they left, I sat at the kitchen counter, munching on the breakfast my father had prepared before dawn, a simple but perfect vegetable omelet, my favorite. My phone buzzed with a text from my mother. "It's been 2 weeks, Emma. This silent treatment is childish and hurtful. I'm still your mother. We need to talk." The familiar guilt twisted in my stomach, along with a newer feeling, anger. 2 weeks without manipulation, without criticism, without walking on eggshells, had shown me just how abnormal our previous dynamic had been. Dr. Brennan called it coming out of the faggy, fear, obligation, and guilt, the emotional states that had dominated our relationship for as long as I could remember. I set the phone down without responding, finishing my breakfast in peace before getting ready for school. The day passed in a blur of final review sessions and graduation committee meetings. By afternoon, I'd made a decision about my mother's request for dinner. I texted my father. "I'll meet Mom for lunch Saturday, before the college fair. The café by the harbor, 11:30 to 12:30. But I want you nearby." His response came immediately. "I'll make the arrangements. Proud of you, Emma." Saturday arrived with perfect early summer weather. Sunshine, blue skies, a light breeze off the water. I dressed carefully for my lunch with my mother, choosing an outfit that was both flattering and something she couldn't easily criticize. A sundress in a color she'd always approved of, with a light cardigan to prevent any comments about modesty. My father drove me to the Harbor Café, parking within sight of its outdoor patio. "I'll be right here," he promised. "If at any point you want to leave, just text me one word: lighthouse. That's our signal. I'll call with an emergency that requires you to leave immediately." "You've really thought of everything," I said, half amused, half touched by his tactical approach to emotional support. "It's what I do," he replied simply. "Go on, I believe in you." The cafe was busy, but not crowded, exactly as I'd planned. My mother was already seated at a table on the patio, her posture perfect as always, her appearance immaculate in a way that suddenly struck me as armor rather than elegance. She stood when she saw me, arms outstretched for a hug I reluctantly stepped into. "Emma, darling." Finally. Her embrace was brief but tight, her perfume familiar and suddenly overwhelming. "Let me look at you." She held me at arm's length, her eyes scanning me in that assessing way I'd grown up with. I braced myself for criticism, but she simply smiled. "You look lovely. That color has always suited you." We sat, a waiter immediately appearing to take our drink orders. Once he left, my mother leaned forward, her voice low and intense. "I've missed you so much, Emma. This separation has been unnecessarily cruel. I hope you know I never meant to hurt you. The dress, it was a momentary lapse in judgment. I was stressed, worried about you growing up too fast, making choices you might regret." "No apology," I noted. "Just justification." "It wasn't just the dress, Mom," I said quietly. "It was everything. Years of everything." Her expression hardened slightly before smoothing into concern. "I don't know what your father's been telling you, but parenting isn't easy. Sometimes being a good mother means making unpopular decisions, setting boundaries, protecting you from mistakes." "Cutting up my prom dress wasn't setting a boundary," I replied, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. "It was punishment for making a choice you didn't approve of." "There's a difference." The waiter returned with our drinks, taking our lunch orders before disappearing again. My mother stirred her iced tea methodically, the clink of her spoon against glass filling the silence between us. "I see Dr. Brennan has been filling your head with pop psychology," she said finally, her tone dismissive. "Next you'll be telling me I'm toxic, or narcissistic, or whatever label is fashionable these days." I thought of Dr. Brennan's actual words: careful, compassionate, focused on behaviors rather than diagnoses. "She doesn't use labels," I said. "She just helps me recognize patterns that aren't healthy." My mother sighed dramatically. "And I suppose your father is the model of mental health? A man who spends half his life at sea, who can barely handle everyday parenting decisions without deferring to me, who suddenly decides he's father of the year." "He's trying," I said, feeling defensive on his behalf. "He admits he should have stepped in sooner, that he missed things he shouldn't have." "How convenient for him," she replied sharply. "Absent for years, then swoops in as the hero while painting me as the villain." "Tell me, Emma, who was there for every scraped knee, every school project, every midnight fever? Who managed this family while he was off playing sailor?" Our food arrived, temporarily halting the conversation. I picked at my salad, appetite diminishing as the familiar dynamics reasserted themselves. My mother as the martyr, sacrificing everything for an ungrateful family. My father as the inadequate partner who couldn't understand the burdens she carried. Me as the disloyal daughter who failed to appreciate her efforts. "I know you were there," I said finally. "And I know it wasn't easy. But being present doesn't justify being cruel." Her fork clattered against her plate. "Cruel? Is that what you think of me? Your own mother?" "Sometimes," I admitted, meeting her eyes. "Not always. But enough that it's affected me. Affected how I see myself, how I make choices, how I relate to other people. For a moment, Something flickered in her expression. Something that might have been recognition, might have been remorse. But it vanished quickly, replaced by the wounded dignity I knew so well. "I see your father has thoroughly poisoned you against me," she said coldly. "I had hoped we could have a reasonable conversation, mother to daughter, but clearly that's not possible right now." "That's not fair," I protested. "Dad hasn't said anything negative about you. He's actually been really careful about that." She laughed, a brittle sound. "Oh, I'm sure. The perfect gentleman, as always. While his military friends spread rumors, while his lawyer builds a case, while he systematically turns my own daughter against me." I thought of the Coast Guard officers who had helped with Operation Cinderella, of Diane's quiet support, of my father's careful documentation of years of incidents. None of it had been done with malice or vengeance, only with a determination to protect me from further harm. "No one's turned me against you," I said quietly. "I just finally have space to think for myself, to figure out what's normal and what isn't. And I suppose cutting me out of your life is what you've decided is normal," she demanded. I shook my head. "I haven't cut you out. I'm sitting right here, trying to have a conversation with you. But it can't be on your terms anymore. It has to be different." "Different how? I'm supposed to just accept your father's version of events? Pretend the last 17 years of mothering meant nothing? Watch while he plays the hero and I'm cast as the villain?" I set down my fork, suddenly exhausted by this circular conversation. "This isn't about heroes and villains, Mom. It's about acknowledging that some things weren't okay, that I deserved better, that we all did." She stared at me for a long moment, something unreadable in her expression. Then she reached for her purse, extracting her wallet and placing enough cash on the table to cover our barely touched meals. "I can see this was a mistake," she said, rising from her chair. "When you're ready to have a real conversation, one that acknowledges everything I've sacrificed for you, you know where to find me." She walked away without looking back, her heels clicking on the patio stones, her back straight, her head high. I watched her go, a complicated mix of emotions churning in my chest. Relief that it was over, sadness that it had gone exactly as I'd feared, a strange emptiness where the desperate need for her approval had once lived. I texted my father, "Lighthouse." Within minutes he appeared at the patio entrance, concern evident in his expression as he spotted me still sitting alone at the table. He made his way to me, taking the seat my mother had vacated. "That bad?" he asked gently. I nodded, pushing my plate away. She couldn't hear me, couldn't acknowledge anything. It was all about how I've betrayed her, how you've poisoned me against her, how unappreciated she is. He sighed, reaching across the table to cover my hand with his. "I'm sorry, Emma. I had hoped." "I know," I interrupted. "Me too." We sat in silence for a moment, the cheerful bustle of the café continuing around us, oblivious to our small family drama. "Ready for the college fair?" he asked finally. I hesitated, then nodded. Moving forward felt better than dwelling on what couldn't be changed. "Yeah, let's go see what futures are possible." As we walked to the car, I realized something important. For the first time in my memory, I disagreed with my mother, stood my ground, and walked away feeling sad but not destroyed. Not desperate to make amends at any cost. Not willing to erase myself to restore her good opinion. It was a small victory, but a significant one. A step toward rebuilding myself from the inside out. Graduation day dawned bright and clear. A perfect June morning with the promise of summer in the air. I stood in front of my bedroom mirror, adjusting the white cap that sat somewhat awkwardly on my carefully styled hair. The gown hung open over my dress. A deep blue sundress I'd chosen myself from a boutique downtown, paid for with my own money from my café job. No one had criticized the neckline, questioned the hemline, or suggested alterations to make it more appropriate. Another small freedom that no longer felt small at all. A knock at my door. "Emma, you almost ready?" My father's voice, excited and a little emotional. "Coming," I called back, taking one last look at my reflection. The girl in the mirror looked different from the one who had stood in this same spot before prom, just 7 weeks ago. More confident somehow, more present in her own skin. Downstairs, my father waited in the living room, camera in hand. He'd traded his uniform for a well-tailored suit in navy blue that almost matched my dress. Not planned, but a coincidence that made me smile. "Look at you," he said softly as I descended the stairs. "Westlake High's newest graduate." "Almost graduate," I corrected. "Not official until they hand over that diploma." He raised the camera. "Humor your old man with some photos before we go?" I posed by the fireplace, by the front door, in the garden outside. No forced smiles, no tense shoulders, no voice telling me to stand straighter, or suck in my stomach, or fix my hair. Just my father's genuine delight and pride, his occasional joking direction to "look scholarly" or "give me your future CEO pose." As he reviewed the photos on his camera screen, I asked the question that had been hovering between us all morning. "Any word from Mom? About whether she's coming?" His expression sobered. "She'll be there. Her lawyer contacted mine yesterday to coordinate. She'll be seated in the parent section, separate from us." He looked up from the camera. "Are you okay with that arrangement?" I nodded. Since our failed lunch 3 weeks ago, my communication with my mother had been minimal. Brief text exchanges. One tense phone call that ended abruptly when she brought up the separation proceedings. The court had granted temporary custody to my father, with scheduled visitation rights for my mother that I rarely took advantage of. It wasn't the relationship I wanted with her, but it was the only one possible right now, given her continued refusal to acknowledge the patterns Dr. Brennan was helping me identify and heal from. "I'm okay with it," I confirmed. "It's my graduation. I want her there. I just don't want—" I trailed off, unsure how to articulate what I didn't want. "Drama," my father supplied. "Tension, walking on eggshells. Having to manage her emotions instead of experiencing your own." Exactly. Sometimes it still startled me how much he understood now, how clearly he could name the dynamics that had shaped our family for years. "Well, we have a plan for that too," he said, smiling slightly. "Operation Graduation. Less elaborate than Operation Cinderella, but equally strategic." I laughed. "You and your operation names." "Military habit," he shrugged unapologetically. "Everything runs smoother with a clear mission designation and protocols." The protocols for Operation Graduation, I learned on the drive to school, included carefully coordinated arrival times to avoid awkward encounters in the parking lot. Diane serving as a buffer during the pre-ceremony reception, and my father's closest friend from the Coast Guard, Commander Wilson, accompanying us to ensure my mother wouldn't try to monopolize my attention or create a scene. "You've thought of everything," I marveled. "That's my job," he replied simply, "as a commander and as your father. Anticipate challenges, develop contingencies, protect the mission, which today is celebrating your achievement without unnecessary stress." The school parking lot was already filling with cars when we arrived. Families in their Sunday best, carrying bouquets and balloons, converging on the football field where rows of chairs had been set up, facing a stage decorated in the school colors. I spotted Olivia with her parents near the entrance and waved. "I need to check in with the graduation committee," I told my father. "Meet you at the reception area in 20 minutes?" He nodded, scanning the crowd with the automatic situational awareness I'd come to recognize as his military training in action. "I'll find our seats and connect with Diane and Jim. Text if you need anything." The next hour passed in a whirlwind of last-minute coordination, lining up graduates alphabetically, distributing honor cords and stoles to those who'd earned them. As class vice president, I had responsibilities that kept me too busy to dwell on family tensions or scan the growing crowd for my mother's face. Finally, as pomp and circumstance began playing through the speakers, we processed onto the field in neat rows, taking our seats facing the audience. From my position near the front, I could see my father sitting with Diane and Commander Wilson in the middle section, their faces easy to pick out. My father caught my eye and gave me a subtle thumbs up. It took me longer to locate my mother, seated near the aisle in the far right section. She wore a pale pink dress and matching hat that made her stand out among the more casually dressed parents around her. Her expression was composed, dignified, revealing nothing of the emotional turmoil that had defined our recent interactions. The ceremony proceeded with the predictable rhythm of high school graduations everywhere. Speeches from the principal and valedictorian, special recognitions, musical performances. As class vice president, I had a brief role introducing the senior class advisor, which I performed without stumbling over my words, earning a warm round of applause. When they began calling graduates to receive their diplomas, I felt a surprising calm. This moment, walking across the stage, accepting the leather folio, shaking hands with administrators, was one I'd been working toward for 4 years. Not for my mother's approval or my father's pride, but for myself. For the future it would open to me. Emma Louise Harrison, the principal announced. I rose from my seat, proceeding up the steps to the stage with measured steps. As I crossed to center stage, I heard cheering from 2 distinct sections of the audience. My father and his friends in one area, my mother and, I was surprised to note, my aunt and 2 cousins in another. Different sides, different perspectives, but both celebrating me in their own way. The principal handed me my diploma with a warm smile. Congratulations, Emma. Westlake High will miss your leadership. Thank you, sir, I replied, genuinely touched by the personal acknowledgement. As I descended the steps on the other side of the stage, diploma in hand, I felt a weight lifting. Not just the relief of completing high school, but something deeper. The weight of trying to be perfect, of trying to anticipate criticism before it came, of making myself smaller to avoid notice. With each step, I left a little more of that burden behind. The reception following the ceremony was held in the school gymnasium, transformed with white tablecloths and flower arrangements into something almost elegant. My father had secured a table near the center, strategically positioned with clear sightlines to all entrances, a detail I now recognized as his military training at work. Always aware of surroundings, always prepared for contingencies. I made my way to him through the crowd, accepting congratulations and hugs from teachers and classmates along the way. Diane spotted me first, waving me over with a bright smile. "There she is," she called. "The graduate of the hour." My father turned, his face lighting up with pride as he saw me approaching with my diploma. He embraced me tightly, whispering, "So proud of you, Emma, so incredibly proud." Commander Wilson, Jim, offered congratulations next, presenting me with a small gift box. "A little something to mark the occasion," he explained. Inside was a beautiful compass, its brass casing gleaming, my initials engraved on the back. "Every new journey needs proper navigation," Jim said with a wink. Before I could properly thank him, a familiar voice spoke from behind me. "Emma." I turned to find my mother standing there, looking perfectly put together as always, but with an uncertainty in her eyes I rarely saw. My Aunt Susan stood slightly behind her, offering me a small wave. "Mom," I acknowledged, suddenly aware of how tense my shoulders had become. "Thank you for coming." She stepped forward, hesitating before embracing me briefly. "You did wonderfully up there," very poised. My father and his friends had fallen silent, watchful but not interfering. I could feel the protective energy radiating from them, ready to step in if needed, but allowing me to handle the interaction in my own way. "Thank you," I said again, unsure what else to add. The easy conversation I could now have with my father felt impossible with her. Too many unspoken hurts, too many patterns unacknowledged. "I brought you something," she said, holding out a small gift bag in the school colors. "Just a small token." I accepted it with murmured thanks, peering inside to find a silver photo frame containing a picture of me at about age 10, dressed in a ballet costume before a recital. I remembered that day. How excited I'd been about my first solo, how my mother had fixed my hair with meticulous care, how proud I'd felt when I'd executed the routine perfectly. "I thought you might want it for your dorm room," she explained. A reminder of happier times. There was something almost plaintive in her voice, a note of longing for a past that looked very different from her perspective than from mine. In her memory, perhaps, she was the devoted mother, preparing her daughter for success. In mine, that day was one of the rare occasions when I'd felt truly seen and supported, not just critiqued and corrected. "Thank you," I said for a third time, unsure how to bridge the vast gulf between those perspectives. An awkward silence fell. My aunt stepped forward, breaking the tension with a cheerful, "We won't keep you from your friends on your big day, Emma. Just wanted to say congratulations in person." She hugged me warmly. "We're having a small family gathering at our place next weekend if you'd like to come. Your choice, of course." I nodded, grateful for her understanding that choice was what mattered most to me now. "I'll check my schedule. Thank you." My mother opened her mouth as if to add something, then closed it again, her expression unreadable. "Congratulations again, Emma," she said finally, her voice carefully controlled. "James," she added with a nod to my father, not quite looking at him directly. "Catherine," he acknowledged, equally formal. They maintained this stiff civility as they exchanged a few brief words about summer arrangements and the custody schedule, before my mother and aunt moved away to greet some family friends across the room. "You okay?" my father asked quietly once they were out of earshot. I nodded, setting the photo frame on the table beside Jim's compass. "Yeah, it was. Better than I expected. Less dramatic." "Good," he said, clearly relieved. "This day is about celebrating you, not navigating family tensions." And somehow, miraculously, that's what the rest of the reception became. A genuine celebration. Friends stopped by our table to chat and take photos. Teachers offered congratulations and reminisced about classroom moments. Olivia and her parents joined us for cake, the conversation flowing easily between adolescent excitement about freedom and adult wisdom about the journey ahead. Through it all, I was aware of my mother's presence across the room, felt her gaze occasionally, but the weight of her expectations, her judgment, her approval or disapproval, no longer dictated my emotions or behavior. It was a freedom as significant as the one marked by the diploma in my hand. As the reception wound down, my father checked his watch. "Ready for Phase 2 of Operation Graduation?" he asked with a conspiratorial smile. "There's a Phase 2?" I laughed. "Of course," he replied as if it were obvious. "The celebration continues at home. I may have arranged a small surprise." The small surprise turned out to be anything but. As we pulled into our driveway, I was astonished to see several cars already parked along the street. Diane's sedan, Jim's SUV, and vehicles belonging to other Coast Guard officers I'd met during the weeks following Operation Cinderella. Inside, the house had been transformed. Streamers in the school colors hung from the ceiling. A banner reading, quote, "Congratulations, graduate," stretched across the living room wall. Balloons floated in clusters around the dining room, where a catered spread of my favorite foods waited on the table. "Dad," I breathed, taking it all in. "When did you do all this?" "I had help," he admitted as Diane emerged from the kitchen, carrying a tray of lemonade glasses. A commander knows how to delegate. For the next several hours, our home buzzed with celebration. Not the formal, performance-oriented parties my mother had always insisted on, where appearances mattered more than enjoyment, but a genuine gathering of people who cared about us, who had supported us through the turbulent weeks since prom night. As evening fell, guests began to depart, until only Diane and Jim remained, helping my father clear away the remnants of the party while I sat on the deck, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. Diane joined me, 2 cups of coffee in hand. She offered one to me before settling into the adjacent chair. "Quite a day," she observed. "Quite a couple of months," I amended. She smiled, understanding in her eyes. "Your father is incredibly proud of you, you know. Not just for graduating, but for how you've handled everything else." "I couldn't have done it without him," I said honestly. "Without all of you, really." She shook her head slightly. "Don't sell yourself short, Emma. Strength like yours doesn't come from outside. It was always there, just waiting for the right conditions to grow." We sat in comfortable silence for a moment, sipping our coffee as the sky deepened toward twilight. "Can I ask you something?" I said finally. "Of course." "Does it ever really get better? With my mom, I mean. Or will it always be this? Distance? Diane considered the question carefully before answering. Relationships evolve, Emma. Sometimes they heal. Sometimes they transform into something different than before. Sometimes they remain limited for our own well-being. The important thing is that you're building your life on your own terms now, not on someone else's expectations. Even if that hurts her? I asked, voicing the guilt that still occasionally surfaced despite Dr. Brennan's reassurances. Your mother's feelings are her responsibility, not yours, Diane said firmly. That's something she needs to learn, just as you're learning to prioritize your own well-being without guilt. From inside, I heard my father's laugh mingling with Jim's deeper chuckle, a sound that had become wonderfully familiar in our house over recent weeks. A sound of genuine joy, unrestrained by the tension that had permeated our home for as long as I could remember. He's different now, I observed. Happier, Diane nodded. He is. For years he compartmentalized, the Admiral at work, the peacekeeper at home. Now he's integrating those parts of himself, being authentic in both spaces. The sliding door opened, and my father stepped onto the deck. Everything okay out here? We're about to cut into that ridiculous cake Jim brought. The one shaped like a graduation cap? I grinned. It's too pretty to eat. Nonsense, he declared. Proper military strategy dictates that we consume the evidence before your mother sees photos on social media and accuses me of sugar-related parenting crimes. His joke, light-hearted rather than bitter, about the situation that had once been too painful to acknowledge, showed how far we'd all come. We could name the dysfunction now, even find moments of humor in the healing. Later that night, after Diane and Jim had departed and the house was quiet again, I sat at my desk, sorting through graduation cards and gifts. The silver frame my mother had given me stood beside the compass from Jim, 2 different perspectives on my past and future side by side. A knock at my door. My father entered, carrying a small wrapped package. One more graduation gift, he explained, sitting on the edge of my bed. I wanted to save this for when it was just us. I unwrapped it carefully to find a leather-bound journal, the cover embossed with my initials, and a small nautical star. Inside, on the first page, my father had written a message. Emma, navigating life's waters requires both a compass to find true north and a journal to chart your course. The compass helps you stay oriented. The journal helps you remember where you've been and plan where you're going. As you embark on this next journey, know that you carry within you everything you need to weather any storm. Your intelligence, your compassion, your quiet strength. These are the tools that will guide you, regardless of wind or tide. I am endlessly proud of the young woman you have become, and honored to stand on the shore, watching you set sail toward horizons I can only imagine. All my love, Dad. Tears welled in my eyes as I read his words. Dad, I whispered, this is beautiful. He smiled, a touch of emotion in his own eyes. I meant every word. You're ready, Emma. For college, for independence, for whatever comes next. The past few months have proven that beyond any doubt. I moved to sit beside him on the bed, leaning against his shoulder as I had when I was small. I'm nervous about college, I admitted, about being on my own. That's natural, he assured me. But remember, being on your own doesn't mean being alone. I'm always just a phone call away, so is Diane, so is Dr. Brennan. And Mom? I asked quietly. He sighed, considering his words carefully. Your relationship with your mother will continue to evolve, Emma. Maybe she'll learn from this experience, gain insight into her behavior and how it's affected you. Maybe she won't. Either way, you get to decide what kind of relationship works for you, what boundaries you need, what interactions feel healthy. That's still hard for me, I confessed. Setting boundaries with her without feeling guilty. It gets easier with practice, he promised. And you've already come so far. We sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the house quiet around us, so different from the tension-filled silences of months past. Finally, my father spoke again. You know, in the Coast Guard, we have a saying about rescues. Sometimes the most important person to save is yourself. I thought about the destroyed prom dress, about the broken relationship with my mother, about the life we were slowly rebuilding from those fragments. about the strength I'd discovered in myself during these turbulent weeks. "I think I'm starting to understand that," I said. He hugged me, then stood. "Get some rest. Tomorrow's the first day of your next chapter." After he left, I opened the new journal, pen hovering over the blank page. So much had happened since that moment 7 weeks ago, when I'd stared at the shredded remains of my prom dress. So much pain, so much growth, so many revelations. I began to write, the words flowing easily. Today I graduated from high school, but that's not the most significant change in my life lately. The real transformation began with a destroyed prom dress and an Admiral father who refused to let that destruction define me. It began with the recognition that some relationships can be rebuilt, while others might need to be reimagined entirely. It began with the understanding that sometimes, the most courageous act isn't standing strong in a storm, but choosing to sail away from waters that have become too treacherous. I don't know what the future holds. I don't know if my mother will ever truly see the patterns that have damaged our relationship, or if we'll find a new way to connect that doesn't require me to diminish myself. What I do know is that I'm no longer afraid to set my own course, to trust my own judgment, to navigate by my own stars. And that, perhaps, is the greatest graduation gift of all. I closed the journal, setting it beside the compass on my desk. Outside my window, stars were appearing in the darkening sky, bright points of light that had guided sailors for centuries. Different patterns to follow than the ones that had shaped my childhood. Healthier patterns. Patterns that led not to confinement but to possibility. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. The summer stretched ahead with college preparations, with custody arrangements to navigate, with the continuing work of healing. But tonight, in the quiet of my room, surrounded by symbols of both where I'd come from and where I might go, I felt something I'd rarely experienced before. Peace. Not perfect, not complete, but real. A foundation to build upon, one day at a time. A starting point for whatever journey came next. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.